Shalom, everybody. It's your sister Shia with another slaying session. So, we are still on the topic of the woman unbound. And today we're going to talk about the conjure woman. And you'll see I have the story of Medussa up. This one is about what's her name? Dalma. I'm reading this from my phone. So, the conjure woman has long lived as a popular American cultural icon, so much so that it seemed destined that multimedia conglomerate the Walt Disney Company would eventually adopt and embrace her. The conjure woman's likeness is reflected in the Disney feature films Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, 2006, and Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, 2007. This essay investigates just what happens to Black women and spirit work when placed in the hands of Disney, a corporation with a sordid history of pirating in other contexts. The work is particularly invested in complicating Black female body politics by addressing the additional stigma against female spiritual autonomy. How is an association with African spiritual cosmologies inscribed on the physicality of Black women in popular culture? I focus my attention on Tia Dalma, the minor Black female character engaged in voodoo in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, applying a close reading of the spiritual iconography and other cinematic coding surrounding her performance of African-based spirituality. I assess Disney's appropriation of Black cultural forms in the construction of fantasy and fairy tales. Images of conjurers, voodoo queens, and obeah women have pervaded the American popular imagination at least since Tituba was described by judicial officials as a slave from the Indies, probably practicing hoodoo during her trial at Salem Village. Mary LaVue's name and likeness are invoked all over New Orleans, where voodoo devotees and the curious alike sojourn to her tomb annually. Both the publishing and film industries have fueled the world's obsession with Black women and spirit work. Zora Neale Hurston's Mules and Men, 1935, and Tell My Horse, 1938, and Karen McCarthy Brown's Mama Lola, a voodoo priestess in Brooklyn, 1990, provide an insider's perspective on the place of women. Well, that was the end of that page. It was a excerpt. So I'm going to go ahead and read this one on the screen. So the story of Medussa is about European fear of African spirituality, melanin, and Black women with power. The story of Medussa was created by Greek society to demonize Black women, specifically those involved in traditionally African spiritual practices, with the hopes of discouraging race mixing with the genetically dominant melanated masses and maintain white genetic survival. Have you ever seen a Black woman so fine, so outrageously beautiful, so majestic, so powerful that her presence alone, even just eye contact, can turn you to stone? This is the power of the Black woman, the primordial human, the prime carrier of melanin, the supreme being of the universe, and mother of humanity. Threatened by her beauty, melanin, allure, spiritual presence, charm, and genetics, a mythology was needed by Greek society to prevent the Greek Caucasian men from falling prey to her glory and magnetic magnificence, which, if left unchecked, would ultimately become the gateway for genetic annihilation for the melanin recessive peoples of early Europe. Now, before I continue, let me lay out some context for you all. I've always had my suspicions about the story of Medussa being of African origin or about African women, yet I've been unable to find direct references to prove it. However, I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Greek philosophy is stolen Egyptian or African philosophy, and that Europe was an absolute wasteland flooded with barbaric cave dwellers until melanated minds brought civilization to the uncivilized. The entire Greek civilization was founded from knowledge gained while bowing at the feet of African priests, magicians, and kings. In other words, all their BS, all their stuff is our stuff, just repurposed to benefit the European collective. That is proven in the works of George G. M. James in Stolen Legacy, John G. Jackson in Christianity Before Christ, John G. Jackson in Introduction to African Civilizations, Martin Bernal in Black Athena, and I'm sure there's more sources. Nonetheless, I'm still not able to directly prove through a scholarly reference that the story of Medussa is of African origin or about Black women. The theory. So for now, here's my theory about the origins of the Medussa story. Mythology is a way extraordinary concepts and phenomena can be explained in a somewhat relatable way. It's not necessarily meant to be taken literally, but rather viewed as a symbol for an idea that is important enough that it should be remembered. So, what does Medussa symbolize in Greek mythology? A hideous, snake headed rape victim whom not even the gods have mercy on. She's so evil and so menacing to look at that even one glance can turn you to stone. In the mythology, she used to be beautiful, desired by all who laid eyes on her, only in the end to become just a target for bounty hunters who want to kill her. Now, if you can, unpackage the white supremacist perspective of this mythology. If you were a Caucasian from a Greek civilization trying to create a story or mythology that is to be used by future generations with genetic survival amongst the melanated masses as a primary objective, what would you say? I'd imagine even the least intellectual amongst the white people in early Greek civilizations were aware of the genetic threat of race mixing with melanated people. They knew if they maintained a pattern of interracial relationships, at some point there would no longer be a such thing as white people. So, for those members of the society who took it upon themselves to implement strategies for the genetic survival of the Caucasian collective, it became a matter of life and death to exterminate any desire within the Caucasian collective to have intercourse with melanated people. The foreigners who had little to no value put on their own women were probably in absolute awe of an African priestess. To them, the mystic nature of Africans was already mind boggling, but seeing a beautiful African priestess in a position of supreme confidence and spiritual power was too much to handle. So much so, they would have no choice but to turn to stone. She was too beautiful to look away from and too powerful to resist. Not only that, but being unaware of the nature of Afro textured hair left them unable to describe locks or dreadlocks as anything other than snakes. So if this black woman is a threat to the genetic survival of Caucasians, then how do you convince all future generations of Caucasian males to avoid this black woman by any means, at any cost? Mythology, also known as generational propaganda. The naturally beautiful, spiritual, holistic, and biologically supreme melanated woman becomes the hideous and undesirable monster whom, if ever was found, should be killed before you even look at her. Does this sound familiar? The rhetoric about black women being hideous and undesirable stems from Caucasian crafted propaganda, such as the stories like Medussa. Conclusion. This is why I think the real story about Medussa was really about creating a mythology to deter men, specifically Caucasian males, from wanting to reproduce with the melanated woman. In those days, there were relatively few Caucasians in relation to the melanated masses, and genetic survival was a major point of focus for early European societies. So it was extremely important to demonize Black women, as they still continue to do now, with hopes of shifting the Caucasian global minority into a more dominant position within the exponentially growing, genetically dominant melanated masses. If Black women become undesirable by everyone, there would be no more melanated masses, and eventually all that would remain is melanin deficient descendants of former Caucasus cave dwellers. I believe this is the intent behind the creation of the Medusa story by Greek society. Very, very interesting. What they say, guys, if you want to donate to their blog, there's their Cash App. All right, next. This is from Google Books, Debating Disney. Bound in Her Bones. The anthropomorphizing the divine. That's a really big word. Another theme is religion. Largely a plot device providing supernatural explanations for undead pirates. And this is talking about Tia Dalma again. Cursed Aztec gold and the fountain of youth in Curse and Tides. Religion becomes pivotal in Chest and World's End. According to religious scholar Donald E. Fatner, Disney's portrayal situates the studio both as a critic of religion in some of its current guises and as a proponent of an alternative religious vision for our time. Religion is introduced in Chest through the character of Tia Dalma, a Black Obeah woman with the power to foretell the future and raise the dead. Learning of Sparrow's demise, she orchestrates a rescue mission to free him from Davy Jones's locker, a place of punishment, the worst fate a man can bring upon himself. In so doing, she sets in motion events that free her from the limitations of anthropomorphized religion. I think I said that right. Tia, we learn, is a goddess trapped in human form. The revelation of Tia's divinity is foreshadowed in the opening scene of World's End, when a child condemned to death sings, "The king and his men stole the queen from her bed and bound her in her bones. The seas be ours, and by the powers where we will roam." As the story unfolds, we learn that the sea goddess Calypso was bound in her bones, or trapped in human form, limiting her power by constraining her nature. This act was done by the pirate king and his men, with the complicity of Calypso's lover, a patriarchal attempt to control nature, the divine, and women in one polyvalent symbol. As Calypso says, same story, different versions, all of them are true. The film's response to this betrayal is articulated by the pirate lord Sao Fang. One such as you should never be less than what you are, he tells Elizabeth, mistaking her for the goddess. This message rings true for the film's representation of women and its representation of religion. The theme of anthropomorphism and the insufficiency of this model for understanding the divine runs through Chest and World's End. In the former, Jack is mistaken for a god by Pelagasto people who plan to release him from his fleshy prison by killing him. Not surprisingly, Jack resists, acting as an inverse mirror to Dalma, who eagerly seeks such release in World's End. Both are victims of the human propensity to anthropomorphize the divine. The corruption of religion to suit secular political and economic purposes is an idea that reoccurs throughout the franchise. The primary villain of the second and third Pirates films, Lord Beckett, coerces the supernatural captain of the Flying Dutchman to do his political bidding, employing religion to destroy those who oppose his political and economic agendas. This use of religion for political purposes is cynical. Beckett tells Davy Jones that the immaterial has become immaterial. Religion is the tool by which political and economic conquest is facilitated. The destruction of civil rights justified. The film's response to this conflation is to forward an alternate model for religious understanding, one that reflects a reaffirmation of American political ideology in its support for separation of church and state. Religion, the Pirates films inform us, in its truest form, is immanent in nature and otherworldly in focus. Salvation comes not through political manipulation of religious symbols, but a grassroots effort and the sweat of our brows. In Disney, religion should never be used to justify the violation of human rights, nor to coerce obedience to political hegemonies. A shot across the bow, to use a nautical metaphor, of religiously motivated political policies or politically motivated religious policies in the post 9/11 era. Drink up, me hearties, yo ho. The Pirates films invert and destabilize accepted norms of American political, religious, social, and economic life. Pirates are heroes, white male businessmen and politicians villains. Women are independent. God is black and a woman. Like mythic trickster tales, however, the films do ultimately reinforce certain cherished ideals. Democracy works, the Constitution/code is inviolable, God exists, and the separation of church and state is fundamental to liberty. Trickster tales, by their nature, shake up accepted norms, opening the door to re-evaluation of the status quo. They also shine a light on instances where the real departs from the ideal, pointing the way to an alternate means of manifesting those ideals in the real world. As such, they are inherently radical and simultaneously traditional, embodying the ambiguous nature of the trickster himself. Disney's films explicitly confront the constraints of gender stereotypes, the incompatibility of corporate power with political democracy, the need to abandon anthropomorphized and politicized modes of religion. Through the character of Captain Jack, the films invite viewers to participate in the negotiation of ideals central to contemporary American society, offering their own heady brew of feminism, religious non-anthropomorphism, and political and economic critique for audience to partake of. Okay. This is another one from Google Books called Belted Heroes and Bound Women. Aya is in the extreme east where lies the house of the early dawn, her dancing spaces, and where Helios, the sun, makes his uprising. Ogygia is located beyond the western boundaries of the world near Hades, at the navel of all the waters, where Atlas, who has discovered all the depths of the sea, himself sustains the towering columns which bracket earth and sky and hold them together. The belting of Circe or of Calypso contains feminine chaotic potential at these two critical cosmic loci. The first, in the far east, where the sun, the all-encompassing astrolabe, astrolabe governing events on Earth and providing definitive illumination and articulation to earthly space, begins its daily arc across the heavens from Okinos, thereby establishing the cyclic nature of time. The second, in the far west, where the sun descends into Okinos, and where sky, sea, and earth are connected, aligned, differentiated, and held in balance. Odysseus, therefore, secures. Okay, let's read this little part here. On the all-pervasive influence of the cyclic appearance and route of the sun in Homer, the route of the sun both defines the nature of terrestrial space and influences human actions on Earth. Whatever the original impulse, it is clear that Homeric man sees the world through the structure of polarity, and that for his structure, the sun is his most definitive guide. The sun is the great measuring rod whose course measures time and divides space. From the character of the sun and its movement, the whole of terrestrial space achieves definition. The sun not only gives the two poles in space, Eos and Zophos, but acts itself as Homer's magnetic pole on man's behavior. Odysseus's place of concealment, Ogygia, then is itself of the primal essence of the sea, and he is held by the goddess in whom are reflected the crossing and binding together of the cosmic substances, earth, sky, and sea. Burnett points out, correctly in my opinion, that Ogygia is located outside the mortal sphere. Burnett, located where the sun sets, at the extreme limit of the world, the island is nevertheless called Omphalos Thalassus, Thalassus, the navel of the sea, and is also designated as Nisos Ogygi or Orgysian Island. A, a qualification Hesiod applies to the waters of the Styx, the infernal river flowing beneath the earth, across the black night at the bottom of Tartarus. It is in the same subterranean place where Hesiod, contrary to the tradition which places Atlas at the extreme west, situates this father of Calypso, supporting the vast sky with his head and arms without losing strength. When Homer speaks of the navel of the sea in relation to the island where Calypso resides, it is so he may immediately evoke the goddess's father, that Atlas of wrongful mind who knows the profound abysses of the entire sea, and who at the same time holds the high columns that now separate the sky and the earth. The mythic geography of the Greeks places Atlas in his role as deeply rooted cosmic pillar reaching through the earth up to the sky, sometimes at the far west, sometimes at the very bottom, and sometimes, yeah, they must use pages. Okay. But hopefully you're getting my drift here. I'm just reading little things here and there, just to get you guys an understanding of the role that women played in history and mythology, and why things are the way that they are today. So moving on, these pages are too jumpy for me, so I'm just gonna go to this here. This is the Book of Zion, DZ, what? Yeah, DZYN, I think. This is part one, the Masters of Wisdom and their attempts to enlighten the world. The Great Cycle of Cosmic Revelations. In 1824, all the Masters of Wisdom gathered at the Privy Council of Shambhala, which was held in the Galering To Lamasery near Shigaits in Tibet. No, I'm jacking these words up. One of the main subjects of the assembly was the question of whether it was worth beginning the great cycle of revealing secret knowledge to humanity, a cycle that would span 3 centuries and 3 parts of the world, the West, the East, and the North. Understanding the unpreparedness of humanity, none of those present expressed much enthusiasm except for one master, the Master Moria, who was supported by his brother Kuthumi. Despite all the objections, the Council of Shambhala nevertheless decided to entrust the Mahatmas Moria and Kuthumi with conducting this experiment of divulging secret wisdom unprecedented in the current evolutionary cycle, and with preparing disciples for this task. Thus, in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, the Master Moria took upon himself the mission of enlightening humanity through giving the world a cycle of books that, as a whole, compose a certain teaching or an integral triune doctrine, which would serve as a light bearing beacon, showing not only the shortest path from the mind to the heart, but also helping people ascend to the heights of evolution. And in 2024, the Privy Council of Shambhala will meet again to consider how successful this experiment has been, with a view to making, at the Grand Council of Shambhala in 2025, new decisions based on the available results. Powers of the Masters of Wisdom. Always, when it comes to the great teachers, the question arises, if the Masters of Wisdom do exist and they possess those powers that are described so beautifully in works by and about Blavatsky, then why don't they apply their superpowers to put the world to rights, stop all wars, and establish a long-awaited peace? But here we should bear in mind that we do not live in a superhero Hollywood movie in which all heroes can do whatever they want to achieve their goals. Essentially, the great teachers are guests on our planet who have voluntarily taken responsibility for the evolution of earthly humanity. They have all come from other worlds, and in various mythologies, we can find the confirmation of this fact in the form of legends about the descent of the gods from the heavens. And therefore, they are obliged to obey the laws that govern on the earth, as well as to strictly observe the immutable laws of the cosmos. One of the most important among the latter is the law of free will. It, in turn, requires that the teachers have no right to violate the free will of people by using supernatural powers and accordingly to intervene in problems created by humanity itself. The only way they can influence the course of events is either through incarnating themselves among people or with the help of disciples karmically related to them, so as to try to bring humanity to reason by human hands and feet. Of course, when the spiritual biographies of the teachers and their disciples become available, we shall see that most of their incarnations on the earth with the aim of helping people have ended in a violent death at the hands of their so called brethren, whether it was crucifixion, burning at the stake, or simply an insidious murder. However, in the rule of non-intervention in processes on the earth with the help of supernatural powers, there are two exceptions where the masters still have the opportunity to intervene at the very last moment, namely, 1. When the life of the entire planet is hanging by a thread because of human activities, but on condition that in the future, this planet and its humanity will be able to justify such a sacrifice on the scale of the universe. Also, such an intervention is possible with individual disciples sent into the world with a specific mission, when all other opportunities to save them have been exhausted, yet the mission entrusted to them still has not been accomplished, at least minimally. The miraculous healings Blavatsky experienced when she was already close to death are confirmations of this. When humanity itself, either on the whole or within a particular territory, calls upon the supreme powers for help and has already applied 50% of the efforts required, but at the same time, the great teachers themselves, if they consider it expedient, can neutralize by half the tragic proportions of various disasters, so to say, as an advance. Nevertheless, we should not forget that the great teachers or Mahatmas are not ephemeral angels soaring in the heavens, but human beings who have attained the supreme level of spiritual development, which in turn determined their so called superhuman abilities. However, this step cannot be achieved through any mechanical practices, but only through selfless and self sacrificing service to the world. While all such abilities are destined and present in all people of the earth, yet they will open in a natural way only when all people of the earth, yeah, only when people learn to love, as demonstrated by the examples of the saviors and saints of all religions. And although people find it easier to imagine the great teachers as gods, we still need to be alert to a kind of catch to avoid drawing too perfect images, which can eventually lead to excessive idealization. But when certain pages from the book of life of the masters are revealed to us, and we see that they, while being human, lived like everyone else and maybe even made the same mistakes that we all did, then it is possible this will result in a sharp rejection of everything that does not fit into the frames of the ideal picture created by our imagination. Sounds like a bunch of crack of, I'm sorry, um, never mind. Um, okay, so I got a few books here. I'm gonna put the picture up here while I read it. This one I'm reading from is Cracking the Da Vinci Code. And this is all about the woman being bound. We just want to go in the Bible. We want to, go to different sources and see what everybody else has to think about the woman and about her role in the church, outside the church. Okay. But this is the book. I'm reading from page 67. The let's see. Actually, I'm gonna go back. All right. So this is page 55 of the Cracking Da Vinci's Code. It says you've read the fiction. Now here's the facts. We don't need to see it. Okay. So this is called Women Are More Sacred and Feminine Than the Sacred Feminine. Constantine and his male successors successfully converted the world from matriarchal paganism to patriarchal Christianity by waging a campaign of propaganda that demonized the sacred feminine, obliterating the goddess from modern religion forever. Why can't I wear a dress to the party? Whined 9-year-old Carrie. Because dresses are for girls, replied Nancy Williams, unwrapping her next pack of cigarettes. But I am a girl, cried Carrie. No, you're not. You've outgrown that. Now you are a young woman. And women no longer have to wear dresses. They can wear whatever they like. Her rough voice did not match her features, which would which most would call beautiful. Okay, well, I like dresses. Carrie was already showing the stubborn streak she had inherited from her mother. And if I can wear anything I like, I want to wear my pink dress with the seashells on it. Her mother put down the freshly lit smoke and turned toward her daughter, trying to keep her temper in check. Carrie, do you know what women's liberation means? Carrie shook her head. She didn't understand the term, but somehow she knew it would mean she couldn't wear her favorite dress to the party. Women's liberation, continued her mother, is all about freeing women from hundreds of thousands of years of being told what to do by men. It is hundreds of thousands of women standing up all around the world saying, we are women, we are not slaves to men. Being a woman means you don't have to wear dresses just to impress boys. You can wear jeans and sneakers just like they do. But I'm not a slave, Mama. I'm just 9, and I like to wear dresses. They make me feel pretty. You only think they make you feel pretty because that's what men have made you think. Liberated women make up their own minds about what pretty is. We don't need men to make up our minds for us. Carrie looked up at her mother and asked in a quiet voice, "Is that what Daddy doesn't is that why Daddy doesn't live with us anymore? Because you're liberated and don't need him?" Nancy Williams picked up her cigarette from the ashtray and took a long drag before answering. "That's right, Carrie. Your father liked me okay when I did everything the way he wanted. When I learned I could think for myself, he got mad and left. You see, he just didn't like a woman who thinks for herself." Carrie blinked several times to bring herself back to the present. Jen was leading tonight's discussion group on the Da Vinci Code. The phrase, "the dangers of free thinking women," from page 125 of the book, had taken her back nearly 15 years into her childhood. Jen had read that passage to lead into this night's discussion. So dark the con of man. 5 million women were tortured and murdered by the church over a period of 300 years. 5 million women. But how could people let that happen? Asked Amanda. Carrie knew Amanda from their freshman year when they had taken a course in world history together. I mean, wouldn't decent people have protested? Surely there would have been some sort of backlash. Heads nodded in unison to this question. Ah, said Jen, a shrewd smile on her face. Therein lies the dark con of man. It was the church, made up the very people you would think would rise up and stop this kind of madness, that was carrying out the systematic executions. The church convinced its gullible followers that if a woman showed any kind of intelligence, if she knew how to heal a wound, for instance, or if she could solve a math equation, she must be a witch. The church was terribly afraid of losing its power to women who happened to be smarter than it was. It's just like Langdon says here on page 124. Powerful men in the early Christian church conned the world by propagating lies that devalued the female and tipped the scales in favor of the masculine. That's the dark con of man. Amanda spoke up again, and listen to what Langdon says later on the same page. The prieuré believes that Constantine and his male successors successfully converted the world from matriarchal paganism to patriarchal Christianity by waging a campaign of propaganda that demonized the sacred feminine, obliterating the goddess from modern religion forever. Wow, thought Carrie. So that's who started the oppression of women, the church. The Da Vinci Code was helping her to make sense of her women's studies classes. She couldn't wait to get back to her dorm to read more. All the subtlety of the Da Vinci Code disappears each time the topic of women is mentioned. Brown's thesis is succinct. Christianity destroyed and killed women. Paganism affirmed them, but he is wrong. Very wrong. If ever a book should be written off as mere fiction, the Da Vinci Code is one. On the other hand, this book can't be ignored so easily due to its author's effective sprinkling of occasional facts, along with assertions by the characters that they are speaking the truth. Brown's book is neither fact nor fiction. It is faction. That is, a wily narrative that blends limited facts with some grossly exaggerated claims, like the claim that the church killed 5 million women in its witch hunts. These claims are placed in the unfolding plot in real locations and times to provide sufficient plausibility. The result is a stunning and effective propaganda piece that moves its readers to a skewed perception of reality. Our first impression of the Da Vinci Code was, it won't be taken seriously. After all, it's just fiction. We were wrong. We assumed people would know that the book is fiction and take it as such. But in its faction form, it had become a powerful advocate for a code that has significant real life implications for today. Is it true that there was a matriarchal culture that the church attempted to crush? Is it true that the church hunted down and killed more than 5 million women over 3 centuries as part of a brutal re education? Is it true that the church, even today, seeks to demonize and repress women? Is it true that Christ was the original feminist? The signs of this code, or at least the portion we are concerned with in this chapter, are neither new nor impressive. Brown makes some sweeping accusations about the church or persons representing the church, denigrating women, treating them as accomplices of Satan. Then he creates a gender fueled conspiracy and manipulates reality in order to demonstrate that pagan female cultures were much better than our Judeo Christian cultures today. In doing so, Brown conveniently ignores the biblical view of women. What is the biblical view of women? What is the pagan view? Are they similar in certain areas? Are they different? Did Christianity conspire to subjugate women? We are not saying that Brown is completely wrong in writing that women have, at times, been mistreated by those who claim to be Christians. At the same time, we object to Brown's technique of focusing on the aberrations while ignoring normative, biblically based Christianity. As Christians, we sadly acknowledge that there are sins within the church on this issue, and those sins cannot be simply swept under the carpet. We acknowledge that the church is comprised of broken and often sinful people. While speaking to a large congregation, Jim, once asked, "Is there any man here who has not, at some time, taken advantage of a woman, or at least mistreated a woman in some way?" No one raised his hand. We were all guilty. The matriarchy myth. Brown writes, Constantine and his male successors successfully converted the world from matriarchal paganism to patriarchal Christianity. He wishfully imagines a matriarchal time before patriarchal rule. Before we consider his claims against Christianity, let us examine the question of patriarchal versus matriarchal in the entire scope of history. All history, including secular as well as biblical history, is more male-led than female-led. In spite of the fact that there have been many superb female leaders in both secular as well as in biblical and Christian history, the preponderance of leaders has been men. Regarding this issue of former matriarchal societies, Stephen Goldberg, chairman of the Department of Sociology at City College, City University of New York, wrote, "The point is that the authority and leadership are and always have been associated with the male in every society. And I refer to this when I say that patriarchy is universal and that there has never been a matriarchy. Theories that hypothesized a matriarchal form of society at an earlier stage of history made a certain, if tortuous, sense until the findings of the past 50 years failed to include a single shred of evidence that such matriarchies had ever existed and demonstrated the inability of all such theories to deal with reality. Of the hundreds of societies we have studied in this century, without exception, they have been patriarchal." Margaret Mead acknowledged that it is true that all the claims so glibly made about societies ruled by women are nonsense. We have no reason to believe that they ever existed. Are we so sure about that? Goldberg's contentions are clear. There is not a single shred of evidence to show female-led early civilizations. Men, according to noted anthropologist Margaret Mead, everywhere have been in charge of running the show. These are two highly regarded scholars saying there has never been such a thing as a matriarchal society. How then, if it never existed, was Constantine able to convert it to patriarchal rule? Which philosophy truly esteems women? Brown implies that pagan nations affirmed women, but does that square with reality? In truth, women in the ancient pagan world were not viewed or treated as well as Langdon would have Sophie believe. In Alvin Smith's groundbreaking book, Under the Influence, How Christianity Transformed Civilization, we see that before the coming of Christ, when the world of paganism was dominant, the lives of most women were held in very low regard. In Greece, India, and China, women had no rights and were considered the property of their husbands. The Greek philosophers of the day had no higher view of women than did other non-Christians. Aristotle taught that a woman ranked somewhere between a man and a slave. Plato taught that if a man lived a cowardly life, he would be reincarnated as a woman. In ancient Greece, women, especially wives, were regarded as lowly. A wife was not allowed to leave her house unescorted. She was not allowed to eat or interact with guests in the home, but was consigned to her quarters, the gynaecium. In contrast, a hetera or mistress was allowed to accompany a married man in public. Hmm. The average Athenian woman had the social status of a slave. Women were not educated, nor were they allowed to speak in public. Silence was considered the great grace of a woman, even at home. Not only were women considered inferior, they were also thought to be the source of evil and were thus not to be trusted. The advent of Christianity radically transformed the fate of women. Even ancient Roman pagan scholars agree that it was the turning point for the freedom and dignity of women. Wherever Christianity has been introduced, it has lifted up women not just in antiquity but even in modern times. Sex selection infanticide was common in 1880 in pagan China before the influence of Christian missionaries. Girl babies were disposed of as a liability. In the last 2 centuries, because of Christian influences, the treatment of women worldwide has improved immensely. It was the influence of Christians that helped to abolish China's practicing of binding women's feet in order to create the diminutive effect that men found attractive. This dangerous practice had led to gangrene infections, needless amputation, and sometimes even death. In India, the practice of suti was ended by the influence of Christianity. A good Hindu wife was expected to follow her husband in death on the funeral pyre, even if she was young with her whole life ahead of her. Child widows were also part of the pagan goddess worshipping Hindu culture. These girls were raised to be temple prostitutes. Amy Carmichael, a Christian, fought to put an end to this practice by rescuing girls from it. The Great European Witch Hunt. Nevertheless, Brown paints a completely different picture through his characters in the Da Vinci Code. According to Professor Langdon, Christianity is violently anti-woman. Langdon recounts the atrocities of the Middle Ages, an era known as the Great Hunt or simply the Burning. Langdon recalls how the Catholic Church, fueled by a publication titled Malleus Maleficarum, or the Witch's Hammer, began a crusade against any woman deemed a threat to the church's power base, labeling such a woman a witch. Those deemed witches by the church included all female scholars, priestesses, gypsies, mystics, nature lovers, herb gatherers, and any women suspiciously attuned to the natural world. During 300 years of witch hunts, the church burned at the stake an astounding 5 million women. Brown has based his claims on old research that has been proven unreliable and deliberately misleading. Jenny Gibbons, in an article titled Recent Developments in the Study of the Great European Witch Hunt, writes, many articles in pagan magazines contain almost no accurate information about the burning times, primarily because we rely so heavily on outdated research. She goes on to insist if your knowledge of the burning times is based on popular or pagan literature, nearly everything you know may be wrong. For instance, Brown refers to Malleus Maleficarum as being authored by an official of the Catholic Church. Actually, the church reacted to its publication by rejecting the legal procedures suggested by the authors and censuring them a few years later. It was secular courts, not the church, that relied on Malleus Maleficarum. Secular courts, not church courts, handed down the majority of capital sentences. Those found guilty of witchcraft by the church were usually given non-lethal penalties such as excommunication or fasting on bread and water for a year. Popular writers, says Gibbons, trumpeted that the Great Hunt was not a mere panic, but a deliberate attempt to exterminate Christianity's rival religion. This is what Brown would have us believe. It is what he means when he refers to the brutal crusade to re-educate the pagan and feminine worshiping religion. Gibbons continues, today, we know that there is absolutely no evidence to support this theory. When the church was at the height of its power, 11th to 14th centuries, very few witches died. We'll go into these stories later. I have the books about the Salem witch trials as well as the institution of the witch hunts. So, it was Christian missionaries who encouraged kingdoms and courts to pass laws protecting men and women from charges of witchcraft. These missionaries said such charges were ungrounded as they did not believe humans possessed the power to do what witches were accused of doing. For example, writes Gibbons, the 5th century Synod of St. Patrick ruled that a Christian believes that there is a vampire in the world, that is to say, a witch, is to be anathematized. Whoever lays that reputation upon a living being shall not be received into the church until he revokes with his own voice the crime that he has committed. And what of the estimates of the number of women killed during the Great Hunt? The estimated number of those killed ranges from hundreds of thousands to 9 million. Brown uses the figure of 5 million, but again, modern research reveals that this is not the case. On the wilder shores of the feminist and witch cult movements, writes Robin Briggs, a scholar at Oxford University, a potent myth has become established to the effect that 9 million women were burned as witches in Europe. Gendercide rather than genocide. This is an overestimate by a factor of up to 200. For most reasonable modern estimates suggest perhaps 100,000 trials between 1450 and 1750, with something between 40,000 and 50,000 executions, of which 20 to 25% were men. Gibbons refers to two other scholars, Brian Lebat and Ronald Hutton, who agree with Briggs's number of those who were actually put to death for witchcraft. Even so, scholars Ross Clifford and Philip Johnson aptly voiced the sentiment of most biblically consistent Christians. That was 40,000 casuals too many. The Inquisition and Salem trials were a hideous violation of human dignity and utterly inexcusable. Indeed, while the number of so-called witches burned has been widely exaggerated, Christians must concede that the burning of even one person is indefensible. Gibbons concludes her essay by saying, we neo-pagans now face a crisis. As new data appeared, historians altered their theories to account for it. We have not. Therefore, an enormous gap has opened between the academic and the average pagan view of witchcraft. We avoid the somewhat dull academic text that presents solid research, preferring sensational writers who play to our emotions. Gibbons wrote this in 1998, nearly 5 years before the publication of the Da Vinci Code. She is a self-confessed pagan who is concerned about writers using misleading information to cast the church in a negative light in reference to the Great Hunt. The truth about the Bible's esteem of women. If Dan Brown had wanted to use reliable information for his research into how Christians view women, he need not have gone any further than the Bible. Consider the examples from the Old Testament. In Genesis, we learn that both males and females receive their identity, their sense of value, from their relationship with the Creator, being made in the image of God. Genesis 1:27. The Da Vinci Code repeatedly misquotes the Bible, stating that Eve ate the fruit, thus she, the first female, brought sin into the world. However, in Genesis 2, which provides more detail regarding creation than Genesis 1, the instruction not to eat the fruit was given to the male, Adam, before the female was created. Genesis 2:16 through 18 and 22. The primary disobedience in Genesis 3 was the failure of the male to give protection, leadership, and nurture to his home. This was not merely this was not merely a woman's sin. This was, first of all, a man's sin. Cowardly Adam tries to shift the blame to Eve, the woman, Genesis 3:12, and even to God, whom you gave me. Eve was an accomplice. That is why God confronts both of them, Genesis 3:9 through 19. The Apostle Paul states it even more emphatically. He says that sin entered the world through the actions of one man, Adam, Romans 5:17. Consider more examples of how women are portrayed in the Old Testament. Esther was courageous to the point of defying the king himself, an action that usually resulted in death. The outcome of her courage was the salvation of an entire race of people. Ruth was loyal, astute, and shrewd. She stayed with her impoverished mother in law after the death of Ruth's husband. She humbled herself in order to secure food for herself and her mother in law. And she was obedient, marrying a stranger who ended up loving and caring for Ruth and her family. Deborah was a wife, mother, and judge in Israel, Judges 4. Proverbs 31 affirms the greatness of women, demonstrating their ability to juggle the amazing pressures as community leaders, businesswomen, wives, and mothers. The chapter exalts the qualities of one whom the Bible portrays as a model woman. She is skilled with her hands and her mind. She understands manufacturing, importing, time management, real estate investing, agribusiness, physical workouts, business profit, a work ethic, hands on labor, welfare and compassion, planning, administrating, and organization, as well as fashion. When she speaks, she is articulate and her speech is content rich. She is an instructor, a teacher. She is an unashamed homemaker and a good one. Not surprisingly, she is busy, very busy. She enjoys being a mother and is quite successful in child rearing. Does this sound like a repressed woman? Exalted women of the New Testament, the genealogy of Christ. The New Testament begins with the genealogy of Christ, Matthew 1 through 16. If the fictional Robert Langdon is correct, the New Testament was manipulated into being a group of female bashing chauvinists. If that is so, then why would these male elitists allow women to have a prominent role in the genealogy? A most unusual inclusion, considering that a typical lineage at that time would have included only males. If the early leaders of Christianity were as villainous as the Da Vinci Code states, then no women would have been included, but five were. Who were these five women? Tamar, a twice widowed woman who had sexual relations with her father in law, was the first woman to be mentioned. Genesis 38:11 through 30. Rahab was a prostitute in the city of Jericho, Joshua 2:1. Ruth was a woman with a sterling character, Ruth 2:11. The wife of Uriah, Bathsheba, is remembered as the woman with whom King David had an affair, 2 Samuel 11:1 through 27. The final woman in the genealogy of Christ is predictably Mary, the mother of Christ, Matthew 1:16. Presumably between the ages of 13 and 15 in a small community, Mary became pregnant before marriage and miraculously without having had sexual intercourse. The virgin birth is a core doctrine of the Christian faith, but what is important to note is that the role of the mother was so honored as to be cited in a list that would typically include only the father. But how I see this is this was a whole lot of mixing going on. And I don't think that for a bloodline prince, I don't think he would have had the DNA from five other nations, if that makes sense. But continuing on, that's another story. If the church through the ages had been as anti-female as Professor Langdon and Leigh Teabing told Sophie, then most certainly it would have deleted such female honoring passages from the scripts. And the examples don't stop with Mary, Christ's mother. More exalted women of the New Testament. Christ's very first announcement that he was the Messiah was shared with a woman, and not just any woman. She was a 5-time divorcee involved with a live-in boyfriend. Furthermore, she was a Samaritan, which meant that Christ violated the mores of the time by crossing racial lines. John 4:17 through 26. When Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, listened to Christ's teaching, at that time an activity reserved for males, and Martha scurried about fulfilling the female role. Christ affirmed Mary and challenged Martha. Luke 10:41 through 42. In contrast to the custom of the time, a group of women were part of the entourage that traveled with Christ and other men. These women even supported his ministry financially. In the book of Acts, Peter cites an Old Testament scripture saying that both your sons and daughters will prophesy. Paul, who is so often accused by feminists of being anti-woman, uses forceful language to declare that both sexes have equal standing before Christ. Neither males nor females have precedent in God's eyes. Following the often discussed directive, wives submit to your husbands, Ephesians 5:22, Paul, only 3 verses later, gives the most difficult assignment any male has ever received. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, Ephesians 5:25. In other words, a husband is to give up his life for his wife. We must not forget that the Bible gives a massive endorsement to the countless faithless women who never assumed public roles, but nevertheless faithfully serve God in the essential role of mother and wife. The single strongest affirmation of women in the New Testament is found in the fact that a woman who, according to the customs of the time, would not have been allowed to testify in court, is the one to testify regarding the single most important announcement in all of biblical or Christian history, the actual, literal, physical resurrection of Christ from the dead. All of Christianity hinges on this one event, and a woman was chosen for this highest honor. Kind of sounds like what we were just reading about the conjuring woman. In light of the evidence cited above, we submit that anyone who claims the Holy Bible is intended to repress women has not read the Bible very carefully. On the contrary, it tells us that God holds women in high esteem, and thus so should Christians everywhere. Women in the early church. Brown also asserts powerful men in the early Christian church conned the world by propagating lies that devalued the female and tipped the scales in favor of the masculine. Is this true? While the Bible itself and Christ personally upheld a high respect for women, it must be acknowledged that there were anti-women statements from church leaders. Tertullian, Cyril of Jerusalem, Jerome, and Augustine as examples during the 3rd through 5th centuries. Some of these continued through persons such as Thomas Aquinas and others, even past the Reformation. Such statements are contrary to the Bible and to Christ. Those statements are an embarrassment to all Christians, and thankfully, those statements are offset by volumes of strong affirmations of women and by the massive number of females who have ministered so effectively throughout the centuries of Christianity. The writings of the early church fathers can be taken affirmatively or negatively, depending upon what one wishes to extract. Examples of writings that show gender equality would include Clement of Alexandria. Woman does not possess one nature, and man another. Rather, they have the same. Cyprian, the mercy of Christ, was equally divided among everyone without difference of sex, years, or persons. Admittedly, Other writers of this age were less affirming. Some early writers blamed women for the inability of men to control their sexual desires. Other writers even insisted that women should confine themselves to childbearing and maintenance of the home. To deny the existence of this stream of thought would be less than honest. However, present day radical feminism has been obsessed with such statements, aggrandizing that and developing an entire feminist theology that insists early Christianity was fundamentally misogynistic. Using such venomous language to describe early Christianity as a whole is a broad generalization, to say the least, and historically dishonest. The Da Vinci Code perpetrates this inaccurate and misleading woman hating claim. Spectacular contributions of women in the church. Furthermore, Brown seems unaware of the spectacular contributions of women throughout church history. Perpetua, this 26-year-old mother of a newborn, along with her servant girl Felicitas, demonstrated unequaled courage as they were martyred for their faith in March 205. Monica 331 through 387, she was the most significant influencer as mother on Augustine, one of the most influential persons of Christianity. Clare, turning away from wealth to follow Christ, she established in 1212 the Poor Clares, now located in 76 countries. Catherine of Siena, born in 1347, she was an activist, prayer leader, humanitarian, and advisor and counselor to the most powerful political and ecclesiastical leaders. Catherine von Bora, without her, Martin Luther could never have become the leader of the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. Susanna Wesley, the 25th child in her family, she gave birth to 19 children, was a brilliant thinker and theologian, and was the counselor, confidant, and theological mentor of son John Wesley, leader of the massive evangelical awakening in the 1700s. Catherine Booth, a stronger preacher than her husband William, she co-founded with him the Salvation Army in the late 1800s in England. And we know that's a whole other story, but we're still focused on the black woman bound. We know the white woman had her place in history, but we're searching for the bound black woman. So these women were strong, they were leaders, they were respected, and they were all part of an inexpressible contribution of women in Christian history. But if Robert Langdon is correct, then there would be no record of women in the church's history. Women in the ministry, if the premise of the Da Vinci Code is correct, would have disappeared because of the oppression of Constantine and his male successors. If Da Vinci's Code is truly in effect, then what do we make of these women just mentioned? Perhaps a more significant question is this. If Brown is correct, if the church has set out to systematically demonize the role of women in ministry, how do we account for all the great women throughout history and in our lifetime who have had such an incredible impact in the spiritual welfare of so many others? The answer to that would be Revelation 2 and 20. Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. That's who these so-called um, famous women were. Most of them, won't say all, but most. Was Christ the first feminist? Christianity, as we have seen, strongly upholds women. The church, while fallible, has also taken great steps to protect and esteem women. So, why are Christians and the church cast as anti feminist? The first women's rights conference in America was held in Wesleyan Church in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. On the 150th anniversary of this event in 1998, there was a celebration of this conference. Yet in the national media coverage of that event, there was no mention of the church's role in the first conference. Perhaps that was because early feminism was biblical feminism based on the scriptural understanding of women. It is unrelated to today's radical pagan feminism. Ironically, Brown's character, Leigh Teabing, was partially correct when he said Christ was the original feminist. Christ, as we showed earlier, validated the role and value of women. Brown, however, recast Christ as a worshiper of Robert Langston's paganistic sacred feminine, a mockery of all recognized and credible research. Christ as the first feminist. Yes, if that means Christ was always for the outcast, the forsaken, the mistreated, the hopeless, it was Christ, not the pagan world that surrounded him, who began to turn the tide in the way women are to be treated. By treating women as equals, Christ also criticized the evil of male chauvinism. And the same must be said of the apostles who followed him. There is, however, one more thing we need to say. Christ also knew that God, the Creator, as the crowning of his work, created males and females to be different. This is the beautiful balance that the Bible seeks to maintain, which Christ maintained. Males and females gloriously different, but unquestionably equal. Chauvinism is not honorable. When Robin Morgan, the first radical feminist I, Jim, ever heard speak, came to Princeton Theo- Theological Seminary when I was a student there in the 1970s, she purposely ignored all males who raised their hands during the question and answer time. This, according to her, was so that the sisterhood could experience power. This is the same woman who stated, I feel that man hating is honorable. No, man hating is not honorable. It is wrong. So is woman hating. Chauvinism is wrong, whether it comes from men or from women. Women taking advantage of men are no better than men taking advantage of women. Both are wrong. Both are unbiblical. Both are unchristian. The Da Vinci Code drives the gender wedge deeper, uplifting women at the expense of men, which is as offensive as uplifting men at the expense of women. Brown brings out the worst in all of us with Sophie's innocent question. You're saying the Christian church was to be carried on by a woman? No, the Christian church was not to be carried on by a woman. It is to be carried on by both men and women, persons not separated by the culturally imposed restrictions of being male or female, but who instead embraced Christ. Galatians 3:28. The church was not and is not a man's thing, nor is it a woman's thing. It is to be carried on by the people who follow God. Contrary to the Da Vinci Code, the Bible in particular and Christianity in general are not anti woman. In contrast, the Da Vinci Code expresses implicit and explicit anti male sentiments. What is driving Dan Brown's agenda? It is the pagan worldview that denies and distorts a core biblical truth. Men and women are created equal but different. Okay, so now we shall take a look at what the Da Vinci Code was talking about. So they wrote this book, The Cracking Da Vinci's Code, in response to the Da Vinci Code. Trying to pull up the summary. So the Da Vinci Code was a novel by Dan Brown that was first published in 2003. Considered a banned book, published in 2003 and banned in Lebanon in 2004 for its offensiveness toward Christianity. The Da Vinci Code is highly frowned upon by Catholic readers. Many other countries have banned the novel for certain periods, as well due to the blasphemous content. So, symbologist Robert Langdon and cryptologist Sophie Nouveau, after a murder in the Louvre Museum in Paris, causes them to become involved in a battle between the Priory of Zion and Opus Dei over the possibility of Christ and Mary Magdalene having a child together. Okay. So the novel explores an alternative religious history whose central plot point is that the Merovingian kings of France were descended from the bloodline of Christ and Mary Magdalene, ideas derived from Clive Prince's The Templar Revelation, 1997, and books by Margaret Starbird. The book also refers to the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, though Dan Brown has stated that it was not used as research material. The Da Vinci Code provoked a popular interest and speculation concerning the Holy Grail legend and Mary Magdalene's role in the history of Christianity. The book has, however, been extensively denounced by many Christian denominations as an attack on the Catholic Church and consistently criticized for its historical and scientific inaccuracies. The novel nonetheless became a massive worldwide bestseller that sold 80 million copies as of 2009 and has been translated into 44 languages. In November 2004, Random House published a special illustrated edition with 160 illustrations. In 2006, a film adaptation was released by Columbia Pictures. The plot: Louvre or Levu, curator and Priory of Zion, Grand Master Jacques Saunier, is fatally shot one night at the museum by an albino Catholic monk named Silas, who is working on behalf of someone he knows only as the teacher, who wishes to discover the location of the keystone, an item crucial in the search for the Holy Grail. After Saunier's body is discovered in the pose of the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci, the police summon Harvard professor Robert Langdon, who is in town on business. Police Captain Bezu Fox tells him that he was summoned to help the police decode the cryptic message Saunier left during the final minutes of his life. The message includes a Fibonacci sequence out of order. Langdon explains to Facci that Saunier was a leading authority on the subject of goddess artwork and that the pentacle Saunier drew on his chest in his own blood represents an allusion to the goddess and not devil worship, as Fox believes. Sophie Nouvet, a police cryptographer, secretly explains to Langdon that she is Saunier's estranged granddaughter, and that Falk thinks Langdon is the murderer because the last line in her grandfather's message, which was meant for Neveu, said P.S. Find Robert Langdon, which Falk had erased prior to Langdon's arrival. However, P.S. actually refers to Sophie, as the nickname given to her by her grandfather is Princess Sophie. It does not refer to postscript. Nouveau is troubled by memories of her grandfather's involvement in a secret pagan group. However, she understands that her grandfather intended Langdon to decipher the code, which leads them to a safe deposit box at the Paris branch of the Depository Bank of Zurich. Neveu and Langdon escape from the police and visit the bank. In the safe deposit box, they find a box containing the keystone, a cryptex, a cylindrical, handheld vault with 5 concentric rotating dials labeled with numbers. When these are lined up correctly, they unlock the device. If the cryptex is forced open, an enclosed vial of vinegar breaks and dissolves the message inside the cryptex, which was written on papyrus. The box containing the cryptex contains clues to its password. Langdon and Nouveau take the keystone to the home of Langdon's friend, Sir Lay Teabing, an expert on the Holy Grail, the legend of which is heavily connected to the Priory. There, Teabing explains that the Grail is not a cup, but a tomb containing the bones of Mary Magdalene. The trio then flees the country on Teabing's private plane, on which they conclude that the proper combination of letters spell out Nouveau's given name, Sophia. Opening the cryptex, they discover a smaller cryptex inside, along with another riddle that ultimately leads the group to the tomb of Isaac Newton in Westminster Abbey. During the flight to Britain, Nouveau reveals the source of her estrangement from her grandfather 10 years earlier. Arriving home unexpectedly from university, Nouveau secretly witnesses a spring fertility rite conducted in the secret basement of her grandfather's country estate. From her hiding place, she is shocked to see her grandfather with a woman at the center of a ritual, attended by men and women who are wearing masks and chanting praise to the goddess. She flees the house and breaks off all contact with Saunier. Langdon explains that what she witnessed was an ancient ceremony known as Heroes Gamos, or sacred marriage. By the time they arrive at Westminster Abbey, Teabing is revealed to be the teacher for whom Silas is working. Teabing wishes to use the Holy Grail, which he believes is a series of documents establishing that Christ married Mary Magdalene and bore children in order to ruin the Vatican. He compels Langdon at gunpoint to solve the second cryptex's password, which Langdon realizes is Apple. Langdon secretly opens the cryptex and removes its contents before tossing the empty cryptex in the air. Teabing is arrested by Fox, who by now realizes that Langdon is innocent. Bishop Aringarosa, head of the religious sect Opus Dei and Silas's mentor, realizing that Silas has been used to murder innocent people, rushes to help the police find him. When the police find Silas hiding in an Opus Dei center, he assumes that they are there to kill him and he rushes out, accidentally shooting Bishop Aringarosa. Bishop Aringarosa survives but is informed that Silas was found dead later from a gunshot wound. The final message inside the second keystone leads Nouveau and Langdon to Rosslyn Chapel, whose docent turns out to be the Nouveau's long-lost brother, whom Nouveau had been told died as a child in the car accident that killed her parents. The guardian of Rosslyn Chapel, Mary Cheval St. Clair, is Nouveau's long-lost grandmother. It is revealed that Nouveau and her brother are descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene. The Priory of Zion hid her identity to protect her from possible threats to her life. The real meaning of the last message is that the Grail is buried beneath the small pyramid directly below the La Pyramide Inversée, the inverted glass pyramid of the Louvre. It also lies beneath the rose line, an allusion to Rosalind. Langdon figures out this final piece to the puzzle. He follows the rose line to La Pyramide Inversée, where he kneels to pray before the hidden sarcophagus of Mary Magdalene, as the Templar Knights did before him. Very interesting storyline. So that was a lot of reading. I'm gonna go grab me a bite and come back and read the Matriarchs of the Covenant and a little bit of the creation of the patriarchy. So stay tuned. A lot of information coming out. Shalom.